Ryan is 34 years old. He lives in Columbus, Ohio, drives a 3-year-old Accord. And last Tuesday, he got the news he had been working toward for almost 2 years. It was a promotion to senior project manager, with a salary bump from $68,000 to $89,000 a year. He called his wife. He called his mom. He sat in the parking garage for 10 minutes with a huge smile on his face doing the math. The numbers were incredible. The car payment, the credit card, finally being able to put real money into the 401k. They were going to be okay. That was 4 months ago. This week, Ryan is lying awake at 11 in the evening, thinking about whether he can afford to fix the gutters on the house before winter. His monthly take-home went from $4,300 to $5,700. That is $1,400 extra dollars every single month, and somehow, his bank account looks almost identical to what it looked like before the promotion. He is not spending it on anything crazy. He just upgraded a few things. Naturally, reasonably, the way anyone would when they finally start earning what they are worth, and the thought that keeps him up at night is not, where did the money go? He knows roughly where it went. The thought is, if I feel exactly the same as I did before, what was the point? If any version of that story is your story, keep watching. Because the thing keeping Ryan up at night is not a budgeting problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is a brain problem. It is one that has been shaping every financial decision you have ever made without you realizing it. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. Hey, I am Ryan. And yes, that story is mine. Not the exact details, but the feeling, absolutely mine. I spent years convinced that my money problems were an income problem. If I just made more, everything would click into place. The stress would dissolve. The math would finally work out. And I was wrong. Not because income does not matter, but because I had no idea what was actually happening inside my own head every time I got a raise. This channel exists because I got tired of financial content that either tells you to grind harder or hands you a generic budget template and calls it advice. What I want to talk about is the psychology, the real, research-backed science of why smart, hardworking people keep feeling behind no matter how much they earn. If that is the conversation you have been looking for, subscribe. Let us get into it. Real quick, before we go any further, if you are someone who has ever hit a salary milestone and wondered why it felt hollow, this channel was built for you. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. And if this video helps you, the like button genuinely makes a difference in getting this kind of content in front of people who need it. All right, let us talk about why you will never feel rich and what to actually do about it. Here is the thing. Most financial content completely skips over. Your sense of financial well-being is not determined by how much money you have. It is determined by the gap between how much you have and how much you think you should have. That should is the whole game, and it is a number that moves. Behavioral economists call this your financial set point. It is a subjective internal benchmark that your brain continuously updates based on 3 inputs. Those inputs are your own recent history, the spending signals of people around you, and the aspirational content you consume. When your actual income sits above your set point, you feel rich. When it sits below, you feel broke. And here is the trap. Every raise you get eventually raises your set point to match. Think about what happened to Ryan. He went from $68,000 to $89,000 for about 6 weeks. He was above his set point, and he felt it. He felt good. He felt the way he thought success was supposed to feel. Then his set point caught up: new apartment costs, a nicer car lease, eating at places that match what a senior project manager eats at. None of these felt like luxuries. They felt like the natural baseline of his new life. And now, $89,000 feels like exactly what $68,000 used to feel like. Not quite enough. This is not a character flaw. It is not ingratitude. It is the predictable, documented output of a brain that was designed for a world where more than your neighbors was a survival signal, not a mood. The mechanism has a name. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation when they are talking about the adjustment to positive events, and reference-dependent preferences when they are talking about the comparison to others. Both are happening to you simultaneously, all the time, in every financial decision you make. And neither one will stop just because you earn more. Let me walk you through 3 pieces of research that I think every American adult should read. They fundamentally change how you understand your own financial life. The first is what economists call the Easterlin paradox, named after University of Southern California economist Richard Easterlin. His decades of research, published and updated across papers from the 1970s through the 2000s, found a consistent and uncomfortable pattern within any country. Higher income people tend to report higher life satisfaction than lower income people at a given point in time. But as national income rises over decades, average happiness stays essentially flat. The United States roughly tripled its real per capita income between the post-war years and the 1990s. Average life satisfaction barely moved. Easterlin's explanation is that happiness is driven by relative income, meaning how you are doing compared to those around you, not absolute income. The second is the research of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, whose work on prospect theory earned Kahneman the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. One of their core findings is that people do not evaluate outcomes in absolute terms. They evaluate them relative to a reference point, usually the status quo, or what they have come to expect. And critically, losses feel roughly twice as painful as equivalent gains feel pleasurable. This means every time your financial set point moves up, falling back to your old income would feel devastating. Even if that old income was perfectly livable, the reference point shifts, and you can never fully go back. The third is a 2022 study by Matthew Killingsworth, Daniel Kahneman, and Barbara Millers. Published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, they analyzed real-time well-being data from over 33,000 employed adults using an experience sampling app. This means participants reported how they were actually feeling throughout their actual days, not in retrospect. They found that happiness does continue rising with income past the famous $75,000 threshold, but with a critical nuance. For people who describe themselves as unhappy for reasons unrelated to money, additional income provided very little well-being improvement. For people who were generally satisfied with their lives, additional income helped more. The conclusion is that money helps, but it cannot fix a broken reference point. 3 studies. 3 different methodologies. The same answer. The feeling of wealth is relative, adaptive, and impossible to permanently satisfy through income alone. I want to put a dollar figure on something that most people never think to quantify. It is the cost of social comparison. I call it the social comparison tax. Here is the mechanism. A 2005 study by economist Erzo Lutmer of Dartmouth University, published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, found that an increase in neighbors' incomes has a negative effect on self-reported happiness, roughly equivalent to the effect of a decrease in one's own income. The people around you getting richer makes you feel worse. Not because you lost anything, but because your reference point shifted upward relative to your actual position. Now let us quantify that in Ryan's world. Ryan is a senior project manager. His peer group, meaning people at his level, in his industry, in a mid-sized American city, earns roughly $90,000 to $130,000. Ryan is at the low end of that range. He does not feel poor compared to national averages, but he feels behind compared to his actual reference group. Here is what that feeling behind costs him monthly, completely, invisibly. He leases a car that is $220 per month, more expensive than a car that would reliably get him to work. That is because showing up to client meetings in something that looks the part matters. He lives in an apartment that is $380 per month, above what his actual needs require. Because his zip code signals professional standing, he spends approximately $290 per month more on dining, clothing, and social activities than he would if his peer group earned $30,000 less, not because he decided to, but because that is the implicit price of membership in his reference group. That is $890 per month, or $10,680 per year, spent not on things Ryan chose, but on signals Ryan's reference group requires. Now here is where the math gets genuinely painful. $10,680 per year invested in a low-cost index fund based on the S&P 500's historical average annual return of approximately 10% before inflation, or roughly 7% after, would grow to approximately $1.07 million over 30 years. Ryan is not just spending $10,680 a year. He is trading $1 million in retirement wealth for the cost of membership in a reference group that will never stop moving its requirements up. This is not a criticism of Ryan. This is what the social comparison tax costs every person who has never explicitly audited what their reference group is actually charging them. Let us run Ryan's actual numbers. These are the ones he has never written down, because writing them down would make them real. Ryan takes home $5,680 per month after Ohio state and federal taxes on his $89,000 salary. His fixed costs are as follows. Rent is $1,850. Car lease is $510. Insurance is $190. Phone is $85. Utilities are $140. Total fixed costs come to $2,775. His variable essentials are groceries at $420, gas at $95, and minimum credit card payment at $140. Total variable essentials come to $655. That leaves $2,250 per month in what feels like discretionary income. Here is where it actually goes. Dining out and bars accounts for $580. That is not extravagant. It is lunch with co-workers, 2 dinners out with his wife, and the occasional work happy hour. Streaming and subscriptions come to $95. The gym he uses 3 times a week is $65. Clothing and personal care, because he needs to look the part, is $180. Amazon purchases and home items total $140. Gifts, events, and 1 weekend trip per quarter averaged monthly comes to $310. Personal savings to the 401k beyond the employer match is $280. Total accounted for is $5,480. The remaining approximately $200 disappears into small purchases he does not track. Ryan saves $280 per month beyond what his employer matches. At his income level, to be on track for retirement by 65 with a modest lifestyle in Columbus, He needs to be saving roughly $900 to $1,100 per month total. He is saving less than a third of that. He is not broke. He is not irresponsible. He is doing what approximately 60% of American households at his income level are doing, according to a 2023 Federal Reserve report on the economic well-being of United States households. He is living in a way that feels appropriate for his earning level, which means spending almost everything that comes in. The question is not whether Ryan can make more money. The question is whether the version of Ryan's life he is currently funding is actually the one he would choose if he ever stopped to choose it. Ryan's situation is not unusual. Let us look at how widespread this actually is. Because this is not a story about individual failure, it is a story about a systemic pattern. According to the Federal Reserve's 2023 survey of consumer finances, about 37% of American adults say they would struggle to cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing or selling something. That number has barely improved, despite significant wage growth in recent years. The baseline anxiety does not move because wages and the reference point cost of living move together. A 2022 survey by Charles Schwab asked Americans what net worth they would need to feel wealthy. The average answer was $2.2 million. But here is the part that stops me every time I read it. Respondents who already had a net worth above $1 million did not, on average, consider themselves wealthy. They had simply raised their threshold. The goalpost exists to be moved. A 2023 Bankrate survey found that 57% of Americans say they feel behind on their retirement savings. That proportion holds remarkably steady across income levels, meaning it is almost as common among people earning $120,000 a year as it is among people earning $50,000 a year. The feeling of being behind is not correlated to how much you earn. It is correlated to how much you expect yourself to have, and perhaps the most clarifying data point of all, according to a 2022 report by Lending Club and pymts.com. 36% of Americans earning over $200,000 a year reported living paycheck to paycheck. These are not people who cannot afford their lives in any objective sense. These are people whose lifestyles have scaled precisely with every income increase, such that the margin between income and spending never meaningfully widens. The pattern is not about income level. The pattern is about what happens when spending adapts to income faster than wealth accumulates. I need to be clear about something, because I know exactly where your brain is right now. You are thinking, so I should just want less. Lower my standards. Pretend I am fine with less than I earn. Live like it is 2015 forever. That is not what I am saying. Not even close. Wanting to improve your life is completely normal and healthy. Choosing a nicer apartment because you genuinely value your living space is a perfectly legitimate financial decision. The problem is not wanting more. The problem is wanting more automatically, on autopilot, because your reference group upgraded and your brain quietly filed it under minimum acceptable. There is a concept in behavioral economics called the distinction between deliberate preferences and adaptive preferences. A deliberate preference is something you actually want when you stop and think clearly. You ask yourself, do I value this enough to trade a certain number of months of financial security for it? An adaptive preference is something you want simply because everyone around you has it, and not having it generates a vague, nagging social discomfort. Most lifestyle inflation is not deliberate. It is adaptive. Ryan did not sit down one morning and decide, with full information and clear thinking, that a $510 a month car lease was the best use of his marginal income. He made the decision in the emotional window right after a raise, surrounded by colleagues who drove similar cars. In a culture that quietly equates what you drive with who you are professionally, the goal here is not deprivation. The goal is deliberate choice, meaning knowing which of your preferences you actually own and which ones your reference group is renting to you. Solution 1 is the reference group audit. Your reference group is the single most powerful determinant of your financial set point, and it is almost entirely something you can manage. Most people never think of it as a variable. It feels like a fixed fact of their life. It is not. Here is a practical framework. Take 15 minutes this week and answer 3 questions in writing, not in your head, but on paper or in a document. The first question is, who are the 5 people whose financial lives I most frequently compare myself to? Not who you admire from a distance, but who you actually measure your situation against in real life. Name them. The second question is, what is the realistic income and net worth of each of those people? Most people discover, when they actually think this through, that their reference group is either significantly wealthier than they are, or is spending at a level that is not actually sustainable for them either. That means you are benchmarking against an illusion. The third question is this the reference group I would choose deliberately, or is it one I have inherited from my job, my neighborhood, or my social media algorithm? Researcher Sonia Lyubomirsky at the University of California, Riverside has published work showing that people who habitually compare upward, meaning to those who have more, report significantly lower life satisfaction than people who compare laterally or downward. This is not about becoming complacent. It is about making sure your primary reference point is not accidentally set to a group that will always make you feel behind. Solution 2 is the margin first budget. Most people budget by tracking where their money went. That is a postmortem. It tells you what happened. It does not change what happens next. The margin first approach flips the order. Before any lifestyle spending is considered, a target margin is set. That is a minimum percentage of take-home income that must go to savings and investments off the top before any other decision is made. Only after that margin is funded does discretionary spending begin. The margin target I recommend starting with is 15% of take-home pay for Ryan. That is $852 per month that goes directly to savings and investment before $1 of discretionary spending is touched. Not after rent, not after dining, not after he sees what is left. First, research by behavioral economist Shlomo Benartzi and his colleagues on automatic enrollment in retirement savings plans, work that influenced the Pension Protection Act of 2006, consistently shows that people who automate savings before spending never notice the loss. They adapt quickly to the lower spending baseline and accumulate dramatically more wealth over time than people who try to save what is left over. There is no what is left over. There is only margin you protected, or margin you spent. Step 1 is to do the reference audit today. Open a Notes app right now. While you are watching this, write down the names of the 5 people whose financial lives you compare yourself to most. For each one, write 2 things. First, their realistic income or wealth, or your best honest estimate. Second, whether you would include them in your reference group if you were choosing deliberately. Keep this list. You are going to look at it differently by the end of this video. Step 2 is to calculate your margin ratio this week. Take your monthly take-home pay. Subtract every dollar that goes to fixed obligations and genuine essentials, including housing, transportation, food, utilities, insurance, and minimum debt payments. Whatever remains is your theoretical maximum margin. Now, calculate what percentage of your take-home, that is, If it is below 20%, that is your most urgent financial problem. Ahead of investment returns. Ahead of income growth. Ahead of anything else. Margin is the only metric that actually converts income into freedom. Target. 15% going to savings and investment before any discretionary spending begins. Step 3 is to run a 30-day comparison fast. For the next 30 days, identify the 2 or 3 specific digital touchpoints that generate the most upward social comparison for you. These might include LinkedIn promotion announcements, Instagram lifestyle content from people you actually know, certain group text, or specific social settings. Reduce your exposure deliberately. This is not about ignorance. It is about controlling the input that calibrates your reference point. A 2021 study by researchers at Stanford and New York University, published in the American Economic Review, found that deactivating Facebook for 4 weeks increased self-reported well-being and reduced political polarization. One of the primary drivers was reduced social comparison. 30 days of managed comparison inputs will not make you complacent. It will give you a clearer view of what you actually want versus what you have been conditioned to want. Ryan is still in Columbus. He still has the same job, the same apartment, the same car. Nothing external changed in the 4 months between his promotion and that Tuesday night lying awake at 11 in the evening. What changed was the reference point. The benchmark moved. The implicit standard for what his life was supposed to look like shifted quietly, automatically, without him deciding it should. That is the truth about wealth that nobody tells you when you are 25 and grinding toward your first 6-figure salary. The feeling of financial arrival is not a destination. It is a moving threshold. And every time you reach it, the threshold moves. The people who actually feel wealthy, not on paper, not in their LinkedIn bio, but in how they wake up on a Tuesday morning, share a specific characteristic. They have defined enough on their own terms, not in response to what their reference group is currently spending. They have a margin between what they earn and what their lifestyle requires. And that margin is something they protect with the same seriousness with which most people protect their income. You cannot out-earn the feeling of not being rich. You can only out-design it. And designing it starts with a single question: whose definition of wealthy am I currently funding? Mine, or the one my reference group silently assigned to me? That question, asked honestly, is worth more than any raise you will ever get. If this shifted something for you, give it a like. It is one click, and it genuinely helps this kind of content find the people who need it. Subscribe if you want more of this, not hustle content. Not 10 stocks to buy now. Just clear, honest thinking about the psychology of money and what to actually do about it. I will link the research I referenced today in the description so you can read the primary sources yourself. I would rather you verify everything I said than take my word for it. And hey, go do that. Reference audit. Right now, before the feeling fades. I will see you in the next one.